So the do that. Okay. Hey, come on. Okay, so chapter. Let's get this back real quick. So chapter 6 is on. So what this whole thing is, just to kind of recap. This whole book is about defending Christianity, right? So why do we believe that this book is about why we believe this book's true, right? So is it true? Is this just something that we believe? Because obviously not everybody believes it, right? I mean, like you go out to school and things like that, and you start talking about the Bible, and like, you know, oh, you really think the Bible's true? In fact, my kind of experience in talking with high school kids is that most of them think that somehow this has been disproven. They can't tell you how it's been disproven or when it's been disproven, but if you talk to them about it, they're like, well, people don't believe that anymore, so there must be a good reason. So like, obviously, like the Bible is like old and outdated and we're past that. So you say, well, how did we get to this point? They don't really know, but that's kind of the conclusion they've come to, because they're like, well, no one seems to like follow this really that I know. Like we don't go to, like most people don't go to church on Sunday and all that sort of stuff. So they think, well, it's just irrelevant. But we think that it is. And so the whole point of this book is to show that, first of all, that God exists. So are there good reasons to think that God exists? Like, are there good arguments? All right. And so actually the interesting thing we did, we started out talking about what is the truth of our situation if there is no God? Because that's kind of relevant to what we're going to talk about today. If there is no God, then what does that mean for our life? And remember, I read, there's a philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche, and he wrote a parable called The Madman. And in the story, he tells a story about this madman that comes into this marketplace and he's yelling, he wants to know where God is, and everybody's laughing at him like, hey, did God get lost? Did he go on a journey? You know, maybe he's emigrated or whatever. And so the guy goes off on this whole rampage about, I'll tell you where God is. God's dead, and we've killed him. And then he starts talking about all the consequences of it. And he finishes this whole tirade, and he throws his lantern down, and they look at him, and he looks at them. And remember what he said? He said, perhaps I've come too soon. And he talked about how like the light from the stars takes time, and thunder takes time. So, you know, when it lightnings, thunder is the sound of the lightning, right? But you see the lightning before you hear the thunder, because the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound, right? In fact, you could figure out how far away the lightning is if you just count. I forget what it is, but you just count 1,000, 1,002. For every second, it's a certain distance away. Did you know that? See, it's like science class.
I just knew that light was fast.
Yeah, but you can figure. I don't even know. I don't even know how to figure it out. But you can look that up. But it's true. Right? So, but the point that the madman is saying is that all these people in the story laughed at him when he said, "I'm looking for God," but they don't recognize the consequences of life without God, and so they don't believe that there's a God, but they live as if there is a God. And we talked about how if there is no God, then that means that there really is no standard for morality. Morality deals with what's good and bad and right and wrong. And last time we talked about there's a difference between good, bad, right, and wrong. Like good and bad is a value judgment. So it would be good, I said it would be good if I donated my whole paycheck to charity, but it's not wrong if I don't, right? They're two different things. Right and wrong have to do with what you ought to do. Right, it has to do with your intent, or like we said before, there's a standard that you have to live up to, right? That's what right and wrong has to do with. And so, and we also talked about an ought implies a can. So if I ought to behave a certain way, then I must have the ability to do that, right? You can't say that, like if I shoved you into her, you can't say that, well, you ought not have hit her, because you could say, well, I had no choice. He shoved me, right? I didn't do that, right? So you could say that it was bad that she ran into you, but it wasn't wrong of her because I pushed her, right? So I was in the wrong. She wasn't in the wrong. See, and so this will all make sense a little bit. So we talked about that. We said that if there's no God, then there's no moral standard. If there's no moral standard, that also means that there's no such thing as justice, is there? because justice is decided in the court system. It has to do with good, bad, right, and wrong, what's fair and what's not. But fairness, equality, justice, purpose in life, we talked about these 4 fundamental questions behind me. If there's no God, how did we get here? No one knows. Time plus chance plus matter somehow. Well, where did the matter come from? Well, nobody knows that, right? Which is a mystery. Why are we here? There really is no meaning or purpose to life. If there's no God, you just come into existence and you go out of existence, and that's it. It doesn't really matter. And it doesn't matter how you live your life, because in the end, you just die and the worms eat you, and that's it. And we're all going to die. The whole universe is going to fade out, like we said. And so ultimately, it doesn't matter, like Shakespeare said, right? We're like actors on a stage, but ultimately it's for nothing, right? It doesn't amount to anything. And then when we die, if there's no God, there's no justice. So like we talked about somebody like Hitler. If there's no God, you'd have to say that Hitler won. He had a great life, right? We still know who he is. People will be talking about him 1,000 years from now. He had power, he had money, he had anything he wanted, and then he just died, and that's it. But clearly, we would also say that Hitler was a bad guy who did a lot of bad things, right? But again, if there's no God, that's just, subjective. So that's what so we went through and we talked about arguments for God's existence, right? And so there were several arguments we talked about. The first argument had to do with anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And so we argued that the cause of the universe can't be part of the universe, right? And if all time, space, matter, energy came into existence, then whatever brought it into existence has to be
timeless, spaceless, all powerful.
Right, all those, and personal. And so that would lead to a God. Then we talked about the second thing is, why does anything at all exist? Do you remember that argument? I'm testing you again. Whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence, either in
the necessity of its existence, or in
its own nature, or
something outside.
External cause, right? The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And from those premises, we know that the cause must be God, right? Then we talked about the argument from design, right? And so the argument from design said, oh, are you cheating? So you gotta get these in your head, right?
Mm-hmm. It's about how the probability that the universe would be the way it is much it's much less probable that the universe would be the way that it is than that there would be a God, right?
Right.
That's the general gist of it, right? I don't remember the exact specifics.
So the exact thing would be.
She's got good memory.
So we talked about something called the fine tuning. What we know is that the universe is like, there are so many things that have to be just so in order for us to be here, right? Like things that if they were changed, even remember they said like one with 60 zeros after it. I don't even know what that number is, but if you change that one, they said, I heard someone say one time, I think I said it on this an earlier one, that it was something like, if you measured from one end of the galaxy or one end of the universe to the other and you changed it like an inch, we wouldn't be here, right? So like the gravitational constant, the cosmological constant, all these things that if the universe was just a tiny bit different, it would have expanded too rapidly or collapsed back in on itself. Either way, no stars, no planets, no chemistry, no life. We're not here. So you have all that stuff. And then we talked about all the things about even just like the Earth. Like if we didn't have all the water that we have on the Earth, you don't have life. Where did the water come from? No one knows. That's amazing, isn't it? Like the science, you go, so like, how did the Earth get so full of water? Oh, meteors had ice on them and they crashed into Earth. That would take a lot of meteors. Right? If we didn't have the atmosphere, if we didn't have plate tectonics, if we didn't have all these things that are on the Earth, that there's like factor after factor, we wouldn't be here. If we didn't have the moon, the Earth would wobble and the temperatures would fluctuate. Crops wouldn't grow. We wouldn't have anything to eat. Think about how fragile we are. Like the temperature has to be within such a narrow range for us to be able to live on this planet, doesn't it? Think about it. If it gets too hot, like if it's like 130 degrees all the time, couldn't be here. If it was like minus 30 all the time, couldn't be here. We're just in that nice, isn't that, boy, that's coincidental. It's really nice, right? Okay. But if you didn't have the moon keeps the earth from wobbling. So like, that's why, if you think about it, we spin, but we're on an axis. So that's why, like in the summertime, like if this is the sun, in the summertime, the earth's tilted like this, right? Because we're in the north. So we're a little bit closer to the sun. And then in the winter time, we're a little bit further away, so it's cold. But just that little tilt, think of the difference between summer and winter. Imagine if that was doing that all the time. That would be a mess, right? If we didn't have Jupiter, if we didn't have the right size sun, if we weren't the right distance from the sun, if we weren't in the right spot in the galaxy, like it's like factor upon factor upon factor. And then so after a while, you have to ask yourself, something seems fishy, doesn't it? And then how did you go from not living to living? No one knows. And when I showed you the video from, there's a guy named James Tour that said, even if you took all the stuff in a cell, and I just put all the parts of a cell and put it in a test tube, poked a hole in it and put it there and said, okay, make it live again. Not even close. No one can do it. All the best brains in the world, nobody can do it. Right? So you're like, what's going on here? That's strange. And so the fine tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, it has to be that way, chance, we just got really lucky, or design. And we said that it doesn't have to be that way, and the chances are so out of this world that we didn't get really lucky. So therefore, the best option is that the universe was designed this way. And then that brings us to the argument that we're talking about now, which is moral argument. And we said that if objective moral values and duties don't exist, then God doesn't exist. But objective values and duties do exist, therefore God exists, right? So that's where we're at today. But we talked about the nature of truth too, so I just want to hit this before we keep rolling. We talked about how well, first of all, the first class we talked about is, does truth exist? Because nowadays everybody's like, well, that's your truth, and it's your truth, but I have my truth, right? Like Oprah said, like, we all have our own truth, and I'm going to speak my truth. Does that make any sense? Can everybody have their own truth? And so we asked, first of all, does truth exist? And I told a story about how, like, I was with a guy that was teaching with me, and he told me that no, truth doesn't exist. Everybody has their own truth. And so I said to him, is that true? Is it true that truth doesn't exist, right? Truth is undeniable. You can't say that there's no such thing as truth without believing that it's true that there's no such thing as truth. Right? Does that make sense? So you can't get away from truth. And so then we talked about how do you know what's true, and we talked about the different laws for truth. Remember what the 2 laws for truth are? See, that's why I don't want you just to hear this stuff. You have to be able to kind of get a grasp on this. So that's why we're recording these, so that you can go back and watch all this stuff again. Right? So we said there's the correspondence test for truth. Does it correspond with reality? If I said that this is a keyboard, is that true? Yeah, because that's what a keyboard is, right? By definition. So there it is, right? And then we said there's the coherence test for truth, which is like, if I wanted to know, okay, is this true? I would use both the correspondence and the coherence test. Remember, the coherence has 3 parts. The first is it logically consistent? Does it say one thing and then contradict itself? Right? Like the Quran says that the Bible is the word of God, that you should believe it. And then it says later on that anybody who doesn't believe in Allah, who's a follower of the Trinity and Jesus, like that you should fight against them. It's like, well, pick one? You can't have both, right? Right? So is it logically consistent? Is it empirically verifiable? Like, if it makes claims like the Hittites existed a long time, people said there's no such thing as the Hittites. They found the Hittites. Right? So if Jesus rose from the dead, can we back that up? And then, is it relevant to my experience? If the Bible says that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Have I sinned? Have I ever done something that I knew was wrong and I did it anyway? Have you? So have I. Have you? Seems to match up, right? We all have. All of us have. And so those are all three of them have to be right and have to cohere. So we said those are the way you test truth. And we said that truth by nature is exclusive. There's only one correct answer to 2 + 2 = 4. It's 4. So that means that there's an infinite number of wrong answers. And so that's part of the question. Like people will say like, well, if this is true, because Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me. So can you get to heaven by believing in the Quran? No. Can you get to heaven by believing in the teachings of Buddha? No. Can you believe in Hinduism? Hinduism's tough to categorize. There's a lot going on there, right? Can you get to heaven if you don't believe in heaven? Like, you know, there's only one way that can be true, and that's not being bigoted or not being a hater. That's just the laws of logic. That just has to be that way, because that's just the way the truth is. All right. So when it comes to morality, the question is it either, because you have two choices, right? Morality is either subjective or objective. Remember, subjective we talked about means that it's up to you. It's like your preferences or beliefs. Like I like mint chocolate chip ice cream. I think that's my favorite. You don't like mint chocolate chip. Right? Are you wrong?
No.
No, there's no right or wrong answer, right? It's just up to you. Okay. And so I gave a bunch of examples before this to explain the difference between the objective and subjective. So we said like, objective or subjective. Jesus rose from the dead. Which would that be?
Objective.
Objective. Because my beliefs and opinions don't have anything to do with whether or not that's true. Either he did or he didn't, right? Or the Bible is historically accurate. Is that objective or subjective?
Objective.
Objective. Either it is or it isn't, right? I said the welding clinic is the most interesting clinic at boys camp. Objective or subjective?
Subjective.
Subjective, right? That's up to you. It's your opinion. It's okay to cheat to win the cabin competition.
Objective. Well, the answer, like, it's not.
But see, this is a moral question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're going with this. Is morality objective or subjective? Is it really up to you to decide what's good, bad, right, or wrong? That goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right? You'll become like God, knowing between good and evil. You'll get to decide. But what we're going to show is, the problem is, if morality is subjective, which means that it's up to me to decide, then what must be true? This is what must be true. By definition, to say that morality is subjective means that I get to decide what's good, bad, right, or wrong. So let's say I like to walk around and just curse and curse and curse and curse, and you come up to me like, you shouldn't talk like that. Well, that's your opinion. I don't think it's bad. Well, that's just to say that it's subjective. But think about it. If I'm the one who gets to decide what's good, bad, right, or wrong, then that means that it can't already be decided, right? It can't, by definition, it can't be, like, no behavior is good or bad in and of itself. No behavior is right or wrong in and of itself. That's really what we're saying, right? So remember I said if I give my mom a hug or I punch her in the face, they're morally neutral on this view. I just assign whether it's good or bad. And let's say my mom loves me and it's not like I'm defending myself or my mom is attacking me. I mean, you can think of some situation where like, well, if my mom was attacking me with a knife, I would punch her in the face. My mom comes to me and brings me cookies and she says, here, son, I baked these for you because I know that you enjoy these. And I'm like, thanks, Mom. Right? Is that okay? No, like we all know, like, no, that's not okay. But if we're saying that it's subjective, what we're saying is that therefore, right and wrong are objectively meaningless terms. In other words, and this goes back to the parable of the madman, if there is no God, there is no foundation for objective morality. And again, there's two different things here I should clarify. I don't have them on here. It's on a later slide. But there's two big words. One is called ontology, Remember, ontology deals with whether or not something actually exists. And there's another word called epistemology, which means how do we know something. A lot of times people will get those confused because they'll say, well, how do I know what's good, bad, right, or wrong? That's a different question of whether or not they actually exist. So we're dealing with, do they really exist at all? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's why if you go back to something like abusing little kids for fun is okay. Like child abuse is okay. I asked this question to my kids at school. Like, is sexually abusing little kids for fun okay? And what do they say? They're like, I don't think so, but like, who am I to say? Wait, what? So like your neighbor is like abusing little kids and you're like, well, that's what he thinks. So I disagree, but who am I to say? No, that's wrong. That's wrong for him. It's wrong for anybody, anywhere to do that. And so the question is, if there's even one action that's right or wrong for anybody, anywhere, then it has to be, that morality has to be objective, right? And so again, we're using the correspondence test for truth. Like, can you live consistently without there being such a thing as good, bad, right, or wrong? I don't think you can. Because we all know, the Bible says that God has given us a conscience. We all instinctively know that there are certain things that are not good. That there really is a difference between loving my mom and punching her in the face. Like, they're not the same. We all know this, right? And so that begs the question, if there is a difference, then is that difference real? Is there some kind of standard that tells us that we use to judge those things? So if we say that there is even one behavior that's objectively good, bad, right, or wrong, then that means that objective moral values and duties do exist. There are behaviors that are in and of themselves right or wrong, good, bad, right, or wrong. And I shouldn't say in and of themselves. I should say, according to the second thing, there must be a moral law. There's got to be some standard by which we evaluate these things. But this is the $24 million question. Where do we get the standard from? Because it can't come from me. Because if it comes from me, then by definition, what is it? Objective or subject?
Subject.
It's subject. Can't come from you, can't come from you. And it has to be perfect. So like, who could provide a transcendent, perfect moral law? God. That's the only option left for us, isn't it? So there has to be a transcendent, perfect moral lawgiver. Okay? And so again, if I said which map is better, and I had this map here versus this map here, the only way to answer this question is to compare it to this, which is a satellite photo. Like, you have to know what North America actually looks like to be able to distinguish better from these two pictures. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, if I said which one's better and you had no idea what North America looks like, you couldn't even answer the question, could you? You'd be like, I have no idea. It's only because you know the standard that you can evaluate them. Let's see if this loads. I don't know. So, you know, C.S. Lewis is? He wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, all those books. You ever read that book? The Disney movies, The Chronicles of Narnia. Have you seen those?
Sure.
Yeah, right. But he said this, I think this is a good quote. He says, the moment that you say that one set of moral ideas can be better than another, you are in fact measuring them both by a standard, saying that one of them conforms to that standard more nearly than the other. But the standard that measures the two things is something different from either. You are, in fact, comparing them both by some real morality, admitting that there is such a thing as a real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get nearer to that real right than others. Or put it this way, if your moral ideas can be truer and those of the Nazis less true, there must be something, some real morality for them to be true about, right? And so that's why, again, if I said, who's a better person, Billy Graham or Hitler?
I don't even know who Billy Graham is.
Billy Graham was probably the most famous evangelist of,
Ever.
yeah, ever. When I was a kid, this might blow your mind here, but when I was a kid, oftentimes, like Friday night, you'd turn on like NBC, ABC, CBS, one of those, and they'd have Billy Graham on, and he'd be in some football stadium somewhere, and it would be on primetime TV, and Billy Graham would be up there, and he'd be preaching a gospel message to people on national TV. He was the preacher to the presidents. He was like an advisor, not an advisor, but like the pastor, whatever you want to call it, to like many of the presidents. So, very famous. Everybody in the world knew who Billy Graham was when he was alive, right? He just died a couple years ago. So even if you didn't know him, you know who Hitler is, right? So if I just asked you that, who's a better person, Billy Graham or Hitler? Billy Graham, because he didn't systematically kill 12 million people plus start a world war, right? But then the question is, again, how do we compare the two if there's no standard? See, this is what C.S. Lewis was talking about. There's got to be some standard that you use, because we all do it, right? Can you think of people who are worse than you?
Yeah.
I can. Worse by what standard though, right? That's kind of the point.
The law.
Well, there's got to be some moral law, right? All right. Now, so I want to show you a quick video, and the point of the video I want to get to is, like, why does it have to come from God? Like, why does God have to be the only source for objective moral standards? And then next time we meet, which will be next week, I'll be here. I want to talk about, I'll show you a couple clips of people trying to reason through this. And then I want to talk about some of the things that are like the hot button issues, which I kind of want to wait till some people are back. But I want to talk about like homosexuality. Like, how do you answer that, right? Because there's a good way that you can answer that without first going right to Romans 1. Like, you eventually have to go to, like, I gave this argument in a class that I did, a couple of college classes already too. And like, ultimately, if they're savvy enough and they keep pushing, like, ultimately it comes back to, did Jesus rise from the dead? Because you got to ground it on something. If Jesus rose from the dead, then he's who he says he is, and then that means he validated the Bible, and so we'll get there. All right, so let me show you this video.
I'm going to argue for the existence of God from the premise that moral good and evil really exist. They are not simply a matter of personal taste, not merely substitutes for I like and I don't like. Before I begin, let's get one misunderstanding out of the way. My argument does not mean that atheists can't be moral. Of course, atheists can behave morally, just as theists can behave immorally. Let's start then with a question about good and evil. Where do good and evil come from? Atheists typically propose a few possibilities. Among these are evolution, reason, conscience, human nature, and utilitarianism. I will show you that none of these can be the ultimate source of morality. Why not from evolution? Because any supposed morality that is evolving can change. If it can change for the good or the bad, there must be a standard above these changes to judge them as good or bad. For most of human history, more powerful societies enslaved weaker societies and prospered. That's just the way it was, and no one questioned it. Now we condemn slavery, but based on a merely evolutionary model, that is an ever-changing view of morality, who is to say that it won't be acceptable again one day? Slavery was once accepted, but it was not therefore acceptable. And if you can't make that distinction between accepted and acceptable, You can't criticize slavery. And if you can make that distinction, you are admitting to objective morality. What about reasoning? While reasoning is a powerful tool to help us discover and understand morality, it cannot be the source of morality. For example, criminals use reasoning to plan a murder without their reason telling them that murder is wrong. And was it reasoning or something higher than reasoning that led those Gentiles who risked their life to save Jews during the Holocaust? The answer is obvious. It was something higher than reasoning, because risking one's life to save a stranger was a very unreasonable thing to do. Nor can conscience alone be the source of morality. Every person has his own conscience, and some people apparently have none. Heinrich Himmler, chief of the brutal Nazi SS, successfully appealed to his henchmen's consciences to help them do the right thing in murdering and torturing millions of Jews and others. How can you say your conscience is right and Himmler's is wrong if conscience alone is the source of morality? The answer is you can't. Some people say human nature is the ultimate source of morality. But human nature can lead us to do all sorts of reprehensible things. In fact, human nature is the reason we need morality. Our human nature leads some of us to do real evil and leads all of us to be selfish, unkind, petty, and egocentric. I doubt you would want to live in a world where human nature was given free rein. Utilitarianism is the claim that what is morally right is determined by whatever creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number. But to return to our slavery example, if 90% of the people would get great benefit from enslaving the other 10%, would that make slavery right? According to utilitarianism, it would. We've seen where morality can't come from. Now let's see where it does come from. What are moral laws? Unlike the laws of physics or the laws of mathematics, which tell us what is, the laws of morality tell us what ought to be. But like physical laws, they direct and order something. And that something is right human behavior. But since morality doesn't exist physically, there are no moral or immoral atoms or cells or genes, its cause has to be something that exists apart from the physical world. That thing must therefore be above nature or supernatural. The very existence of morality proves the existence of something beyond nature and beyond man. Just as a design suggests a designer, moral commands suggest a moral commander. Moral laws must come from a moral lawgiver. Well, that sounds pretty much like what we know as God. So the consequence of this argument is that whenever you appeal to morality, you are appealing to God, whether you know it or not. You're talking about something religious, even if you think you're an atheist. I'm Peter Kraft, professor of philosophy at Boston College for Prager University.
Okay, maybe should I show you one more video? Sorry.
Sorry, I have to go back upstairs.
Yeah. Let's see this one.
Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Katie,
Hey,
hi.
Katie. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm great.
I just had a question about the moral issue where you said that there's things that we inherently know that we already know is right and wrong, which I had kind of two questions about it. First was that you had said previously that God and the Bible, that's what gives us morality. Without that, it's just an opinion. So if we already have these inherent traits, then how can it just be an opinion? We can still,
Oh, no, I see. I think I see where you're going, Katie. Let me reframe it. What I don't mean is I don't mean that if I just have a moral sentiment that it's just my opinion. If my moral sentiment corresponds to opinion, I'm saying if there is no such thing as goodness known as God's nature, then everything what I have about morality is just an opinion, because there is no objective morality for me to appeal to see if my opinion lines up with his nature. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And the second thing, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I should have like processed this more before I stood up.
Take your time. It's okay.
Basically, sorry. You said that there's an inherent set of morals, and people without God wouldn't have morals, and that is not subjective. But yet, throughout history and different cultures, each set of cultures has their different sense of morality. Like, there are cannibals who believe that that's perfectly fine, and there are people who believe in that's, well, I don't believe in cannibalism, so there are people that believe cannibalism is wrong, so.
Good question. Let's take the cannibal situation for a second. Because the guy I mentioned earlier, J. Wojciechowski, I was talking about to Moses, he talks about that in his book. It turns out that people who are cannibals just define people in the other tribe as not human. And then they go through these rituals to try and expunge themselves of the guilt of engaging in cannibalism. They know it's wrong, and what they do is they redefine the other people as not human, so then suddenly it becomes right for them. It's the same thing that happened with the Nazis. Hitler could not get his SS to kill Jews without dehumanizing the Jews. He called them subhuman creatures in order to get the Jew, or to get his SS to actually kill them, because it's such a strong sentiment that you ought not kill innocent human beings. So what do you need to do in order to get people to kill innocent human beings is you just define them as non-human.
Yes, I understand that dehumanization is what makes the murder, but aside from murder, any other moral issues like LGBT rights, that actually spans through many different churches, how they have different opinions as the time goes on, and as that we go on as a society, things in the Bible change. Not in the Bible, our views on how we interpret the Bible change.
That's the difference between what we call sociology and morality. Morality, let me reverse that. Morality is true, right, and wrong. What we think about true, right, and wrong, and how we practice morally is what's called sociology. And so we might change our moral practices, but that doesn't necessarily mean that right and wrong changes. If right and wrong changes, there's no way to see if you're ever making any moral progress. Because say we all agree slavery's wrong, right? So there's got to be a standard that says slavery's wrong, right? If the idea that slavery was wrong changed, you couldn't see whether you're getting better or worse compared to the standard. The standard can't change if you're going to say that, oh, our society's getting better or our society's getting worse. The only way you can use terms like better or worse is if you have a reference that doesn't change, a standard.
But just the standards have changed. Like, there was a long time ago, slavery was acceptable.
The sociological standards have changed. What we thought about morality changed, but morality didn't change. God's nature didn't change. What we thought about God's nature may have changed. Does that make sense?
All right, so we can kind of pick that up next time. Any questions at all before we stop? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it made sense, but my first time here, it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, you just jumped into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah.
So do you have YouTube?
Yeah.
So go on, just look up Grace Gospel Allentown, and then you can watch. There's 7 videos on there. So like the first 7 deal with kind of a lot of the stuff that I just kind of went through real quick at the beginning. And then we'll try to get the other ones up there soon, but at least the ones about truth and all that stuff are on there. And then the objective, subjective, all that stuff's explained in those first couple. So if you get a chance this weekend, the nice thing about YouTube is you can watch it at higher speed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the first time we watched YouTube on here, the speed was at like 2.5,
Yeah.
whatever.
all right, so we'll stop there for today.